The clock on the nightstand read 11:47 p.m. when I heard my daughter-in-law's voice slip through the gap beneath the bedroom door, low, deliberate, and wrapped in a coldness I had never heard from her before. I had been lying there in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat, when 3 words cut through the silence and changed everything. She has to go. My name is Margaret. I am 63 years old. And that night, the night of a Tuesday in late November, I lay in my son Daniel's guest room with my blood running cold, holding my breath, certain that if I moved even an inch, the floorboards would betray me and whatever was being planned in that hallway would find me before I could find a way out. I had sold my house to be closer to family. Now I was in that family's home, listening to them decide what to do with me. Let me take you back 6 weeks to the beginning, because this story does not start at midnight. It starts with a phone call from Daniel, my only son, the boy I raised alone after his father walked out when Daniel was 9 years old. He called me on a Sunday morning, his voice warm and eager the way it used to be when he was a child asking for something he already knew I would say yes to. "Mom," he said, "Priya and I have been talking. We want you to come live with us. We have the space. You'd have your own room, your own bathroom. We want to take care of you." I had cried, I am not ashamed to admit it. I had cried standing in my kitchen in Baton Rouge, clutching the phone with both hands like a woman grabbing a rope over deep water, because I had been lonely. Terribly, quietly, devastatingly lonely since my retirement. My friends had scattered. My knees ached in the Louisiana heat, and my son, my Daniel, was offering me a home. The move. I sold my house in 31 days. I gave away my furniture to neighbors who needed it more than I did. I kept my mother's china, my winter coats, my books, and the framed photograph of Daniel at age 6, missing his 2 front teeth, holding a fish he had caught and was so proud of that he refused to let it go even as it flopped in his little hands. I packed my life into 17 boxes and a suitcase, and I drove 12 hours north to Daniel and Priya's house in Charlotte, North Carolina. The house was beautiful. 3 stories, a wraparound porch, a garden that Priya kept immaculate. She met me at the door wearing a linen dress and a smile that I now understand was calibrated, warm enough to welcome, careful enough to reveal nothing. "We're so glad you're here, Mom," she said, and hugged me in the way you hug someone you have not chosen but are obligated to receive. I noticed things in those first weeks, small things. The way Priya cleared her throat when I touched the good dishes. The way my son would look at me and then look quickly at his wife, as though checking a dial to see how much warmth he was permitted to show. The way my boxes sat in the corner of the guest room for 2 weeks before anyone helped me unpack them, and when I finally unpacked them myself, I discovered that the shelf space I had been promised, "You can use the whole closet, Mom, the whole thing," had been quietly filled with Priya's off-season clothes and extra linens. I said nothing. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I rearranged my books on the floor and called it home. But I said nothing. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself this was an adjustment for everyone. I rearranged my books on the floor and called it gratitude, and kept my mouth shut and smiled at dinner every evening, while Priya talked about her work at the marketing firm and Daniel laughed at her stories, and the 2 of them existed inside a life that had a shape I could not quite find an edge to fit into. The change. It was in the 4th week that Priya's mask, and I use that word not with cruelty, but with the precision of someone who has had time to look back and understand what she was seeing, began to slip. It started with the kitchen. I had made biscuits one morning, the way I had always made them, the way Daniel had grown up eating them on Saturday mornings with honey and butter. I had left a plate of them on the counter with a note that said simply, "Good morning, made these for you both." When I came downstairs that afternoon, the biscuits were gone and the note was in the recycling bin. Priya was at the counter making a smoothie and she looked at me and said, without turning fully around, "We're actually trying not to have white flour in the house. Daniel's on a new plan." "Of course," I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." She said nothing more, but that evening she cooked dinner for herself and Daniel and did not set a 3rd place at the table. When I came into the kitchen and saw 2 plates and 2 glasses, she looked up and said, "Oh, I thought you had already eaten." I had not eaten. I went upstairs and ate crackers and a tin of sardines over the bathroom sink, standing up at 7 p.m. in my son's house. I went upstairs and ate crackers and a tin of sardines over the bathroom sink, standing up at 7 o'clock in the evening in my son's house, listening to their laughter float up through the floor below me like something I had once been allowed to be part of. But I said nothing. What was I going to say? Where was I going to go? My house was sold. My furniture was gone, and I loved my son. I loved him with the particular ferocity of a woman who had raised a child alone, who had worked double shifts and skipped meals and driven him to every baseball practice and sat in the cold bleachers and clapped for him and believed in him and built her whole adult life around the architecture of his becoming. I could not believe, I refused to believe, that Daniel knew what was happening. The night. In the 5th week, I found the notebook. I was not snooping, I want to be clear about that. I was looking for a pen in the small drawer of the hallway console table because mine had run out, and beneath a stack of takeout menus I found a slim blue notebook with Priya's handwriting on the cover, her name, and beneath her name, 2 words that made my hands go still, the plan. I did not open it, I put it back exactly where I found it. I walked to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and I stared at the wall for a very long time. That was 4 days before the midnight I began this story with. 4 days of watching more carefully, of noticing that Priya had started making calls from the back garden, keeping her voice low, glancing at the upstairs windows, of noticing that Daniel had grown quieter with me, not cold, never cold, but quiet in the way a man gets quiet when he is carrying something he does not know how to put down. And then came the night itself. I had gone to bed early, around 9. I was reading one of my detective novels, the kind with an old woman protagonist who sees everything and is underestimated by everyone, which I have always found enormously satisfying. When I heard their footsteps on the stairs, they stopped outside my door, and then Priya's voice, barely above a whisper but perfectly, cruelly audible through the old door with its imperfect seal. I spoke to Sunnyside Gardens today. They have an opening in January. I've already sent your mother's details. We just need her to sign the paperwork voluntarily, or we establish that she can't manage independently. Either works. A silence, then Daniel's voice lower. She doesn't need a care facility, Priya. She's not, she's fine. She's a disruption, Daniel. She's in our space. She's in our life. This was always the plan, you agreed. Another silence, longer. Give her until the new year, my son said quietly. We'll talk to her after Christmas. Footsteps, their bedroom door closing. I lay in the dark and understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water poured directly into my chest, exactly what I was to them. Not family, a problem to be managed toward a solution they had already chosen. I lay in the dark for exactly 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I have always found that clocks help in moments of crisis. They keep the world anchored to something measurable when everything else has gone formless and strange. The escape. At 11:58 p.m., I got out of bed. I moved the way I had moved when Daniel was a baby, and I needed to cross his room without waking him, slowly, precisely, with every ounce of my attention in the soles of my feet. I pulled on my clothes in the dark. I took my handbag from the hook behind the door. I took my phone charger from the wall socket. I took the photograph of Daniel at 6 years old, holding his fish. I left everything else. I carried my shoes down the stairs in my hand and put them on in the foyer. The front door had a lock that clicked, so I went out through the back, through the garden Priya kept so perfectly, past the rose bushes she had showed me with such pride on my first day there, out through the garden gate and onto the quiet street. It was 38 degrees and I had no coat. I walked 4 blocks to the gas station on the corner of Berkshire and 5th. I sat in the fluorescent light of that gas station on a plastic chair beside the coffee machine, and I called my friend Gloria, who lives 40 minutes away in Concord, and who has been my friend for 31 years and who answered the phone on the 3rd ring and said, without my saying anything at all except her name, Margaret, tell me where you are. She came in 42 minutes. She pulled up in her old Buick, and I got in and she took one look at me and reached into the back seat and handed me a blanket. Just happened to have one, the way Gloria always just happened to have exactly what you needed, and she drove and did not ask a single question until I was ready to answer them. What his wife had planned. Here is what I know now, 3 months later, from my room in Gloria's house where I have been living while I rebuild. The plan was never for me to be part of their life. I discovered this from Daniel himself, who called me 4 days after my midnight escape, 4 days, which tells you something, and who said in a voice that had finally shed its careful measurement, Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't want this. Priya and I, things have been complicated. We talked for 2 hours. I learned that Priya had never wanted me there, that the invitation, which I had taken as love, as my son reaching toward me across the distance, had been her idea in the beginning, yes, but only as a temporary solution to their financial situation. They had been struggling with the mortgage. Having me sell my house and move in had given them the breathing room they needed. The plan in the notebook I had not opened, was always to transition me to assisted living within 6 months, after the house finances stabilized, presenting it to me as concern for my health and independence. I had sold my home and driven 12 hours, and unpacked my 17 boxes into their corner for a mortgage payment. I did not collapse when Daniel told me this. I want you to understand that. I am 63 years old. I have buried a mother and a marriage. I know what real endings feel like. What I felt was not collapse. What I felt was a strange, clarifying anger, not the hot kind, but the cold kind, the kind that hardens in you like steel and becomes, over time, something you can build from. She had chosen the facility before I had finished unpacking, but she had not chosen what I would do next, and that was the one thing that remained entirely mine. What I did next. I did not stop speaking to my son. I want to make that clear, because this is not a story about cutting people off. This is a story about a woman who nearly allowed herself to be managed into a smaller and smaller life, and who, at 1 minute to midnight, chose not to. Daniel and I speak every Sunday now. He and Priya are in couples counseling. He told me last month, quietly and without drama, that he is reconsidering many things. I believe him. I also believe that the boy who held that fish with both hands and refused to let go is still in there somewhere, and that he has his own reckoning to complete in his own time. As for me, Gloria has a spare room and a big kitchen and a garden that needs 2 people to manage it, and she has been asking me for years to move to Concord. I am using what remains of my savings to take a real estate course, because at 63 I have decided that I am not done yet, not by a long measure, and there is something I want very much to prove to myself about what a woman can still build in the second half of her life. I still have the photograph, Daniel at 6 holding the fish. He is squinting against the sun and grinning so hard his eyes have disappeared into his cheeks. I keep it on the windowsill beside my bed in Gloria's house, where the morning light hits it first. I look at it sometimes and I think about that boy, all the Saturday mornings, all the cold bleachers, all the double shifts and skipped meals, and I do not regret a single one of them. Not one, because he is still my son, and because the love I gave him was real and freely given and was never a transaction, even when I discovered that other people had been transacting around it. That is the difference between them and me, and it is a difference I intend to carry like something bright for the rest of my life. If you are a mother or a daughter, or anyone who has ever loved someone more than they were loved in return, you are not alone and you are not finished.